The biting December wind swept through the streets of Chicago, wrapping its icy fingers around every corner and crevice. Harold Dawson, a 74-year-old veteran, sat hunched in his usual spot outside a sleek glass building that belonged to a tech giant, Atlas Innovations. His threadbare coat, patched in places, did little to fend off the freezing cold. He clutched a battered cardboard sign with trembling hands, the words "Veteran in Need," "Any help appreciated," scrawled in faded ink. For 5 long years, this had been Harold's life. The cold pavement, the hurried passers-by, and the memories of a life he once knew. It wasn't just the loss of his wife, Mary, to cancer that had broken him. It was the crushing weight of the medical bills that came after, stripping him of his home, his dignity, and his hope. On most days, the bustling workers of Atlas Innovations would scurry past without so much as a glance. Harold understood. Invisibility came with the territory of being homeless. But today, something was different. The morning air crackled with an energy Harold couldn't quite place, and that energy was about to change his life forever. Harold had learned to survive on the streets through routine and grit. Every morning, he meticulously organized the few possessions in his cart. A faded photo of Mary tucked safely in a pocket, a rusted toolkit from his days as a mechanic in the Army, and a blanket patched together from scraps. These weren't just items. They were pieces of a life he held on to fiercely. This morning started like any other until he heard the unmistakable sound of an engine sputtering to a halt. Harold looked up, his eyes narrowing as he spotted a sleek black car emitting thin wisps of smoke. The vehicle rolled to a stop not far from him, and out stepped a man in a tailored suit, his face etched with frustration. Harold blinked twice. Even living on the streets, he couldn't mistake the man now pacing beside the car, Anthony Marshall, the founder of Atlas Innovations. Harold watched in silence for a moment as Anthony pulled out his phone, glancing at the screen and muttering under his breath. Whatever he was trying to do wasn't working, and Harold could see the man's irritation mounting. For a moment, Harold hesitated. Who was he, an old homeless man, to approach someone like Anthony Marshall? But then he thought of Mary's words. If you see someone struggling, lend a hand, Harold. It doesn't matter who they are. He took a deep breath, pushing himself to his feet. His joints protested with each movement, but he shuffled toward the car. "Excuse me, sir," he said, his voice gravelly from years of hardship. "Looks like you're having some car trouble. I was a mechanic in the Army. Maybe I can help." Anthony turned sharply at the sound of Harold's voice. His initial reaction was one Harold had seen countless times before, a flicker of hesitation, the wary look people gave when approached by someone homeless. But then Anthony's expression softened, curiosity replacing caution. "A mechanic, you said?" he asked. "Yes, sir. Spent 20 years fixing everything from jeeps to helicopters," Harold replied, standing as straight as his aching back would allow. "Mind if I take a look?" Anthony hesitated for a moment before nodding. "I'm in a bit of a bind here. I've got a meeting downtown in less than an hour. If you think you can help, I'd appreciate it." Harold nodded, his confidence returning as he moved toward the car. He lifted the hood, and the familiar smell of oil and coolant hit him. His fingers, though stiff with arthritis, began to work methodically. "Your cooling system's leaking," Harold explained after a moment, pointing to the issue. "I can patch it up temporarily, but you'll need a proper fix later." Anthony watched in silence as Harold rummaged through his cart, pulling out an old rubber patch and his drinking water. "You carry a toolkit with you?" Anthony asked, his tone a mix of surprise and admiration. "Always," Harold said with a faint smile. "You'd be surprised how handy it comes in." For the next 20 minutes, Harold worked with precision, his hands trembling slightly but his focus unwavering. "Try it now," he said, stepping back. Anthony slid into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine roared to life. "That's incredible," Anthony said, stepping out of the car. "You just saved me from missing a crucial meeting. How much do I owe you?" "Nothing, sir." Harold said firmly. "Just glad I could help. My wife always said helping others doesn't cost a dime." Anthony studied Harold for a moment, his gaze lingering on the man's worn coat and the shopping cart filled with his belongings. "What's your name?" he asked. "Harold Dawson," came the quiet reply. "Well, Harold Dawson," Anthony said, pulling a sleek black business card from his pocket. "I don't believe in coincidences. I want you to come to this address tomorrow at 9 a.m. Ask for Caroline in HR. Harold frowned, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. "I don't want charity, sir." "It's not charity," Anthony said firmly. "It's an opportunity, one you've more than earned. Will you come?" After a long pause, Harold nodded. "Yes, sir, I'll be there." That night, Harold barely slept. He held the business card tightly in his hand, afraid it might vanish like a dream. Could this really be the second chance he'd prayed for? The next morning, Harold spent his last few quarters at a public bathroom, cleaning up as best he could. He put on his least worn clothes and arrived at Atlas Innovations exactly at 9 a.m. The building's gleaming glass exterior seemed to tower over him, a stark contrast to the cold pavement he was used to. Inside, a kind-faced woman introduced herself as Caroline. "Mr. Dawson, we've been expecting you," she said warmly. "Mr. Marshall was very impressed by your skills and your integrity. He asked us to find a way to bring you onto our team." Harold's jaw dropped. "I'm 74, he stammered. "Most people think I'm too old to work." "Mr. Marshall believes wisdom and experience are priceless," Caroline replied with a smile. "We'd like to offer you a position as a senior maintenance advisor. Your expertise will be invaluable in making our vehicles more repair-friendly for everyday mechanics. We'll also provide housing and full medical benefits." Harold felt his knees weaken. This can't be real," he whispered. "It is, Mr. Dawson," Caroline assured him. "Welcome to Atlas Innovations." That evening, Harold stepped into a small but clean studio apartment arranged by the company. On the table was an envelope with his name written in neat handwriting. Inside, he found a check large enough to cover all of Mary's lingering medical debts and a note from Anthony. "Your kindness reminded me of what really matters. This is a small repayment for what you gave me. Hope." Harold sank to his knees, tears streaming down his face. For the first time in years, the weight on his shoulders began to lift. The next day, Harold began his new job at Atlas Innovations. Dressed in a crisp uniform provided by the company, he walked into the bustling maintenance division, feeling both excited and apprehensive. The room was filled with young engineers poring over intricate designs of electric vehicle prototypes, their energy palpable. "Harold Dawson, right?" A man in his mid-30s extended a hand. "I'm Greg, lead engineer here. Heard you're the new advisor. We're lucky to have you." "Lucky?" Harold chuckled, shaking Greg's hand. "You sure you've got the right guy?" Greg smiled. "Anthony Marshall doesn't make mistakes when it comes to people. Let me show you around." As Harold was introduced to the team, he quickly realized how much his knowledge was needed. Many of the engineers were brilliant but lacked practical experience with traditional vehicles. Harold's expertise bridged that gap. When a young engineer struggled to understand a cooling system design, Harold stepped in, his voice steady as he explained the mechanics in simple terms. "Think of it like the veins in your body," he said, pointing to the schematic. "If one gets clogged, the whole system overheats. Now, if we adjust this—" He tweaked the diagram, and the young engineer's eyes lit up with understanding. By the end of the day, Harold's contributions had already made a difference. Word spread quickly about the old mechanic who could solve problems no one else had even thought to address. Over the weeks, Harold became a fixture at Atlas Innovations. His knowledge wasn't just valuable, it was transformative. Engineers would line up at his desk, eager to learn from his decades of experience. But Harold didn't just offer technical advice. He also shared stories from his past, weaving lessons about resilience and compassion into his work. Back in the Army, he told a group one afternoon, "I once fixed a chopper with nothing but duct tape and a prayer. Sometimes it's not about having the best tools, it's about making the best of what you've got." What truly set Harold apart, however, was his unwavering kindness. Every morning, on his way to work, he carried granola bars in his pocket to hand out to the homeless he passed. "Everyone deserves a little help," he'd say with a smile. His actions inspired others at the company, and soon, employees began volunteering at local shelters, launching initiatives to support veterans and those in need. Anthony Marshall took notice. "Harold," he said during a company meeting, "you've done more than improve our vehicles. You've improved our culture. You've reminded us what it means to care." One evening, Harold returned to his apartment to find a familiar envelope waiting for him. Inside was another note from Anthony. "Your impact here has been immeasurable. Enclosed is a bonus to thank you for your dedication. Use it however you see fit." Harold stared at the check, his hands trembling. It was more money than he'd ever dreamed of holding. For a moment he thought about keeping it, securing his newfound stability. But then he thought of Mary's voice, her belief in paying kindness forward. The next day, Harold visited the same shelter he'd frequented during his hardest times. "I'd like to make a donation," he told the director. "But more than that, I'd like to help. Is there a way I can volunteer?" Over time, Harold became not just a supporter, but a pillar of the community. His story spread throughout Chicago, inspiring others to give back. Local news outlets picked up the story, dubbing him the mechanic who fixed more than cars. Every year, on the anniversary of the day he helped Anthony Marshall, Harold returned to the spot where their paths first crossed. But now, instead of clutching a cardboard sign, he came with a folding chair, a thermos of coffee, and a box of supplies for anyone in need. "Sometimes all it takes is one act of kindness to change a life," Harold would tell anyone who stopped to listen. "I should know. It happened to me." At 74, Harold Dawson had gone from a man who felt invisible to someone whose actions illuminated the lives of others. His story was a testament to the power of resilience, the value of experience, and the transformative impact of compassion. What's one act of kindness you can do today that might change someone's life? Harold's journey reminds us that no matter how dark the road may seem, kindness has the power to light the way. His legacy lives on, proving that it's never too late to rewrite your story or to help someone else rewrite theirs.